civic organizations, and our private sector. Refugees often arrive with a wide variety of professional and educational backgrounds, and what we know from the refugee experience is that they're extraordinarily successful. Attracting newcomers and welcoming them robustly is a win-win for everybody.
This is CNN. More people get their news from CNN than any other news source.
Hello everyone, I'm Zain Asher. You are watching CNN Newsroom, coming to you live from New York. Tonight, fears of a cholera outbreak in the Russian-occupied city of Mariupol. I'll be speaking to the World Health Organization about the dire conditions on the ground. Then, Boris Johnson faces an uphill battle to win back his party's support after narrowly winning a vote of confidence. And later, heads of state from across Latin America descend on Los Angeles for the 9th summit of the Americas, but with some notable countries missing, can the summit really be a success? Stalemate is not an option. That defiant statement from Ukraine's president today as he vows to retake all of his country's territory from Russia. But the situation is looking increasingly grim in Luhansk. A pro-Russian separatist leader says that 97% of that Donbas province has now been, quote, liberated, in his words. Ukraine is still fighting to hold on to the last major city under its control in Luhansk. Officials say the situation in Severodonetsk is consistently difficult and changes by the hour. But they say there is constant shelling along the front line. Our Ben Wiedemann is in Kramatorsk, Ukraine tonight and joins us live now. So we're seeing street by street battles in Severodonetsk. What's the latest, Ben?
Really, it just continues to be the same situation as we've seen over the last 24 to 48 hours there, that after over the weekend, Ukrainian forces were able to push the Russians back, regain some territory in that city. It appears now that they're back on the defensive. They insist that the Russians have tried to advance further within Severodonetsk, but they've been able to hold the line. But continues to be the case that Ukrainian forces are far outnumbered when it comes to artillery being used by the Russians. The Russians, basically, their military tactics are highly dependent upon intense and massive use of artillery against targets like this, and therefore the Ukrainians simply don't have much that they can counter with. So they are at best holding on to just the last bits of the city that they can. Zain?
And Ben, let's talk about Mariupol. That city obviously destroyed by Russian forces, but the nightmare there certainly is not over, especially those having to endure the grim task of identifying bodies.
Yeah, in addition to the grim situation within the city itself, where there's the threat of a cholera outbreak, apparently there's so many dead bodies in the street that even the mass graves aren't enough to hold them. But there was a body exchange between the Russians and the Ukrainians, and we were the only camera when in Kyiv at the central morgue when they started to unload the bodies of Ukrainian soldiers killed in the 2-month siege of Mariupol. But before we get to that report, we must warn viewers that some of the images they're about to see may be disturbing. And so begins on a sunny summer morning the grimmest of tasks. Workers at Kyiv's central morgue examine the contents of 160 dirty, putrid body bags containing the badly decomposed remains of soldiers killed during the 2-month siege of the port city of Mariupol and in the city's sprawling Azovstal steel plant, where Ukrainian forces made their last stand. Ukraine and Russia have conducted an exchange of bodies as part of the agreement that ended the siege. Forensic examiner Lilia Filipchuk has been on the job for 3 years. Since the war began, she's had little rest. We also examined the bodies from Bucha and Irpin, she says.
referring to Kyiv suburbs where retreating Russian forces are accused of committing atrocities against civilians. Elena Tolkachova is also helping. She's affiliated with the Azov Brigade, which fought in Mariupol. The brigade is a nationalist militia that was integrated into Ukraine's armed forces. The morgue is already full of bodies from Kyiv, from Bucha, from Irpin, she says. So we have to put them in a refrigerator truck. Morgue workers search the ripped and ragged clothing for documents and tag and bag personal items. This is just the start of a long process.
Some of these bodies have no identification, so their DNA will have to be sampled. And it may take a month, maybe more, to find out who they were.
And only then will their loved ones know their fate. Finality for the living and the dead will have to wait.
And many of these corpses were simply left out in the open for weeks. We had a good look at them. Most of them were completely unrecognizable. There were very few things that would help the authorities identify them. We understand that so far, out of those 160 body bags, only 8 bodies have been positively identified. Zane?
Ben Wiedemann, live for us there. Thank you so much. Now, for those still living in Mariupol, the situation is beyond imagining. According to local officials, dead bodies lying in the streets, as our Ben Wiedemann was just touching on there, and the city's sanitation system is in a desperate state. The World Health Organization has been warning for weeks that these conditions pose a, quote, huge hazard. And now fears are growing that Russia may soon close down the city over fears of a cholera outbreak. And WHO spokesperson Dr. Margaret Harris is joining me live now from the Poland-Ukraine border. Dr. Harris, thank you so much for being with us. It's unimaginable what you think about when you think about what residents there are dealing with right now. In addition to surviving some of the fiercest battles on the ground, they're now having to contend with cholera outbreak, potentially dysentery, other ailments as well. Just walk us through what you've seen and heard on the ground.
Good evening, Zane. Well, certainly the people who've come out have indeed described it as a living hell. And those who are still there are living in a place where there's been massive destruction to the things that we all expect to be normal, such as drinking water supplies, sewerage. And the reason we had been warning all those for many weeks now about the risk of waterborne diseases is because when you've got damage to the sewage system and the water system, you're going to get mixing of the two, and therefore you are likely to get all the different diseases, the gastroenteritis, but the other diseases as well, the other infectious diseases, because when people are living under such difficult circumstances, their immune systems are tremendously weakened simply by what they're suffering from.
So what more do we know about Ukraine's sort of health infrastructure, A, before the war, and B, now?
So Ukraine was one of the real success stories. They had started to reform their health system, and they were going from strength to strength. And honestly, what strikes me as remarkable is even in the midst of all this terrible suffering and damage, and I've just looked at the number of attacks on healthcare. We have verified 290 attacks on healthcare. Even so, as the damage happens, every chance they get, they start plugging the gaps, repairing as they go. It's almost like seeing the plane being repaired while flying. And people, doctors and nurses who've been displaced by the fighting or by all the different things going on, will pick up and start working wherever they end up. So it's an extraordinary resilient system, but it's a system that should never be under the pressure we are seeing it under.
Right, because hospitals are being bombed. I mean, when it comes to how people who have been infected get treated, I mean, that is certainly very tenuous. I mean, how does Ukraine deal with this when it is in the middle of a war?
Exactly. And not just deal with it, but you've got hospitals where every night, I was in a children's hospital recently, every night the staff go down at 8 o'clock to the basement where they've laid out beds throughout the basement. These are places which are normally home to a few rats and, pipes and things. Now the entire children's hospital, all the children go down there, the staff go down there, the parents go down there and spend the night there every night, because they decided that there are so many attacks, so many air raid warnings that they can't keep on bringing the kids up and down. They'll never get any sleep. So they simply go there every night at 8 o'clock, and the entire children's hospital sleeps down there.
Gosh. So there are about 150,000 residents left in Mariupol. Originally, the city had about 400,000. So what efforts are being made to give those residents access to clean water? Because how on earth do you begin to prepare food if you don't have access to clean water?
You're quite right. Indeed, it's critical to protect yourself from cholera and from any of the gastrointestinal diseases, any of the waterborne diseases, by ensuring that you wash your hands, that you can ensure that your food is clean and that the water you're using is clean. So for us, we're trying to reach to people with advice, but more than advice, things work with partners to see what can be done about clean drinking water. Now, we are definitely working through partners. I'm not saying we as WHO on the ground, but it is critical that people be reached with the things they can use to protect their health.
And in terms of where a city like Mariupol goes from here, I mean, you've got a prolonged warfare. There's no sign this war is going to end anytime soon. But you've also got warmer weather. We're in June. It's summer now. How is that impacting, the potential for more waterborne diseases?
That definitely increases the risk. So as I said, we have already assessed the risk as very high. And we do know that in the past, there have been outbreaks of waterborne diseases such as cholera. Back in 2011 was the last time we saw a big outbreak in Mariupol. And that was during the summer months, June, July, August. So this is the period when you're likely to get it even under normal circumstances. And that's why it's so important to ensure that people have access to clean and safe drinking water and the means to protect themselves.
Dr. Margaret Harris, thank you so much. It's unbelievable what people on the ground in that country are going through, as if they haven't been through enough already. Dr. Harris, thank you so much. To Westminster now, where confidence has been won, but confidence has certainly been shaken as well. Boris Johnson is Prime Minister on the defensive after scraping through a vote of confidence by members of his own party. More than 40% of Conservative MPs called for him to go. Many of those on his side are thought to be on the government payroll, meaning their jobs are directly connected to the Prime Minister. Mr. Johnson gave a pep talk to the cabinet earlier, saying his government will focus on issues like the cost of living crisis, echoing his reaction to the vote last night.
Of course, I understand that what we need to do now is come together as a government, as a party, and that is exactly what we can now do. And what this gives us is the opportunity to put behind us all the stuff that I know the media have quite properly wanted to focus on for a very long time, and to do our job, which is to focus on the stuff that I think the public actually want us to be talking about, which is what we are doing to help the people of this country and all the things we're doing to take this country forward.
Right, Phil Black is joining us right now outside number 10 Downing Street. So, Phil, you heard the Prime Minister there. He wants to sort of draw a line under everything that happened, draw a line under Partygate, sort of sweep everything under the rug, move forward. But it's not really going to be that easy, is it?
No, it is an act of willful optimism for Boris Johnson to describe this as a good result. But that's what he's done. And he and other supporters have used other adjectives like decisive, like comfortable, handsome, to describe the nature of coming out successfully through this no confidence vote. And they argue that this is should really draw a line beneath the whole thing, that it's a mandate for him to get on with the job of governing, and as you heard there, governing on the sorts of issues, fixing the sorts of problems that he says the British public are most concerned by. That is no doubt his wish, but the reality is, as you touched on, that a little over 40% of sitting Conservative MPs no longer want him to be Prime Minister. That is not a figure strong enough to push him from office just yet, but it is a substantial number and strong enough to reveal the scale of the discontent within the party over his continued leadership, to reveal his weakness, the weakness to his authority. Now, for the moment, as it stands, under the rules, Boris Johnson can't be challenged again in this way by the Conservative Parliamentary Party room, not for a year, but we are told those rules could change, and it is still possible for pressure to continue to increase on this Prime Minister. He's got some big challenges coming up. A couple of by-elections, which will no doubt take on great importance in being a reflection of the view and the feeling among the British public. There is also an ongoing inquiry into whether or not Boris Johnson lied to Parliament over the Partygate affair. If that inquiry finds that he did, then once again the pressure will ramp right up. But for the moment, Boris Johnson hopes that he can focus on policy, focus on getting things done, and with a little luck, perhaps remain as the party leader, as the Prime Minister, into the next scheduled election in a couple of years' time. Sam.
But the fact remains that there are a lot of people within his own party who don't have confidence in him, who quite frankly want him to go. How does he win those people back?
Well, it's a very good question, because the things that these people are angry about are pretty fundamental. We're talking about character and leadership and integrity and trustworthiness. These are not things that once lost they can't be easily restored. Some of the people that have voted against him have clearly done so on a point of principle, because they think that his behaviour clearly just simply makes him unfit for the office. Others have made a colder, you would think, political calculation, one that says his popularity in the electorate has waned as a result of this, and this may not be the Prime Minister who is best positioned to ensure that I hold on to my seat at the next election. Johnson's supporters also say that there are people in these numbers who clearly have never liked Johnson, or whose careers have suffered under his time as Prime Minister. But it is going to be a long slog for the Prime Minister from here. History shows, recent history shows, that Conservative Prime Ministers don't just bounce back from a no-confidence vote, even when they win more convincingly than Boris Johnson has won this particular challenge. So he may be talking about getting on with the job, but he knows that there is still great uncertainty, many challenges ahead for him to pursue and hold on to his political office.
Yeah, we saw what happened with Prime Minister Theresa May. Phil Black, live for us there. Thank you so much. Okay, still to come tonight, a bumpy start. How snubs and boycotts are threatening to derail the first US-hosted summit of the Americas in years. And a new cancer drug stuns researchers with how well it performs in trials. Full details ahead.
Heard it all before? But have you heard it like this?
The ultimate disruptor looks set to shake up our world. What's really going on?
Fast-paced news, in-depth reports, and fact checks from the perspective of The Global Brief with Bianca Nobilo. Tonight on CNN.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Heads of state and foreign ministers from across Latin America are joining U.S. leaders in Los Angeles right now for the 9th Summit of the Americas. But it's who is not coming that is getting the attention. The Biden administration refused to invite the leaders of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, saying that dictators should have no place at the table. And that led to Mexico's president saying that actually he's not coming either. We have a team coverage for you. Joining me live now from Washington is senior White House correspondent Phil Mattingly. And in Havana, we've got CNN's Patrick Ottman. Phil, let me start with you. Given all the no-shows here, especially from heavyweights like, for example, Mexico, what does Biden hope to achieve with this summit, do you think?
Look, I think there is palpable frustration, at least behind the scenes, from White House officials right now, in the sense that they feel like this has become more about the invitations than the actual event itself. And when you look at the event itself, you look at the work, when you talk to White House officials, when you talk to other administration officials who've been working on this kind of gathering of the hemisphere over the course of the last several weeks and months, the entire goal here was really to kind of insert U.S. leadership, really reassert U.S. leadership in this region at this moment in time. A moment in time, obviously, where countries have been ravaged by the coronavirus pandemic, have been ravaged economically. There's facing real challenges. The U.S. is when it comes to Chinese footholds within some of these countries' economies, and the U.S. really reasserting leadership, reasserting tools and mechanics for new investment inside the region where the United States would be leading the way. Instead, there's a lot of discussion about who's not coming at this point in time. Now, to be clear, obviously there will be top Mexican officials, including the foreign minister, who will be appearing. The U.S. side believes that they will still be able to secure significant agreements for the region right now, but I think there's a lot of frustration given how the president pledged a new moment in time for a region beset by kind of crises and backhanded treatment over the course of the 4 prior years, that this is what they're dealing with at this very critical moment for this administration summit.
Phil, stand by. Patrick, let me bring you in, because if you have, for example, countries like Cuba, like Nicaragua, like Venezuela that are not invited, what's the view from their perspective? Can this really be a productive summit if certain countries are excluded?
Well, they're furious here, and it's leading to somewhat ironic comments from Cuban officials saying that the United States is not democratic because they're not inviting countries from throughout the region. And Cuba, for much of the Cold War, was sidelined, was excluded. But during the last 2 summits of the Americas, they were invited. They were at the table, and they had an opportunity, which is what they're seeking, to voice their long list of complaints. They will not have that opportunity this time. That is why they have marshaled their influence around the region, which is a lot bigger than a small island would suggest, and led to Mexico's president AMLO saying that he will boycott the summit. But it's not just him. It's Honduras's president, and for very different reasons, El Salvador's president, Guatemala's president. And so essentially you have all the countries that the leading countries the United States needs to engage with on immigration, and their presidents will not be at the table. And that is simply not the optics they want. But when you do talk to Biden administration officials in the State Department, they say that the idea of having Cuba, which has been trying mostly peaceful protesters over the last several months, Nicaragua, where the president there has locked up his opponents, and Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, who is under an indictment for drug smuggling in the U.S., that simply is just not tenable in their minds, that they can't have these countries, which they call dictatorships, at the same table with the American president, lecturing the American president. But it has led to this really remarkable backlash, and even many of the presidents who are coming have called out the U.S. and said that Cuba and these other countries should have been included.
Right, that's the big controversy. So Phil, this summit is happening just as a caravan of migrants is making its way to the U.S.-Mexico border. Given that backdrop, what are the U.S.'s key priorities from this summit, Phil?
Look, I think you hit at a really key point about why it's not just an invitation issue that the Mexican president has decided not to attend. The leverage right now that the Mexican administration has when it comes to the U.S. because of migration issues in particular, also those Northern Triangle countries, is just simply at a different place than it has been during past Summit of the Americas. And you're seeing that leverage kind of be put into play. And that is exactly why the Mexican president, AMLO, will have a private meeting at the White House sometime in July. So migration is obviously critical. It is something that this administration has been grappling with, often falling short on over the course of the first 16 months in office. But I do think when you talk to administration officials, investment in the region is most critical. They recognize what the entire region, really the entire world, has been through over the course of the last 2.5, 3 years. They feel like U.S. leadership in the 4 years prior wasn't in the place that it should be when it comes to this actual hemisphere. And I think, you will hear a lot, if not explicitly, certainly implicitly, about the concern of growing Chinese influence in the region, and the country, the United States and its top officials trying to use different mechanisms, whether it's through public health, whether it's through investment, whether it's through structures that they can put into place to kind of re-engage or reinvigorate the U.S. role in this region to try and almost to some degree block or at least better what they've seen from the Chinese in the region over the course of the last several years. Those will be really, really critical components. I don't think you're ever going to get away from who's not in attendance, but that will be the focus for U.S. officials and the president over the course of the next several days.
And Patrick, let me just bring you in as well, because you heard Phil touch on the fact that Mexico's president is going to be having a private meeting at the White House in July. But given all the grievances, how does the U.S. reset its relationship with Latin America, do you think?
Well, they'll have to, because it's not just the United States' backyard, as it used to be called. You have China courting these countries, and that's perhaps given some of these countries a little more leeway to stand up to the United States. So people in Latin America, which has been so hard hit by the pandemic, leaders in Latin America feel that the U.S., particularly the Biden administration, has not followed through on promises to re-engage. And certainly, if this summit was meant to be that moment where they would begin to re-engage, it's hit a really rocky start here. And when it comes to Cuba, we're seeing an exodus of Cubans leaving towards the United States. Even if the Biden administration doesn't want to speak to Cuba, they may not have an option to. They probably have to sit down with them very soon.
Right. Patrick Oppmann, Phil Mattingly, thank you both so much. Right, U.S. Senate Republicans trying to reach a gun reform deal with Democrats met today with their party colleagues to see how far they're willing to go. But one top Republican said most attendees were in a listening mode. 2 weeks after the school shooting in Uvalde, Texas, there is urgency to reach an agreement. But Republicans say that raising the age to buy a military-style rifle or banning them are unlikely. The Gun Violence Archive reports at least 246 mass shootings in America just this year. Among those in Washington today urging Congress to take action is actor Matthew McConaughey, who actually was born in Uvalde, Texas. And McConaughey is actually joining the press briefing at the White House now.
Responsible parties in this debate seem to at least be committed to sitting down and having a real conversation about a new and improved path forward. A path that can bring us closer together and make us safer as a country, a path that can actually get something done this time. Camille and I came here to share my stories from my hometown of Uvalde. I came here to take meetings with elected officials on both sides of the aisle. We came here to speak to them, to speak with them, and to urge them to speak with each other, to remind and inspire them that the American people will continue to drive forward the mission of keeping our children safe, because it's more than our right to do so, it's our responsibility to do so. I'm here today in the hopes of applying what energy, reason, and passion that I have into trying to turn this moment into a reality. Because as I said, this moment is different. We are in a window of opportunity right now that we have not been in before. A window where it seems like real change can happen. Uvalde, Texas is where I was born. It's where my mom taught kindergarten less than a mile from Robb Elementary. Uvalde is where I learned to master a Daisy BB gun. That took 2 years before I graduated to a .410 shotgun. Uvalde is where I was taught to revere the power and the capability of the tool that we call a gun. Uvalde is where I learned responsible gun ownership. Now, Uvalde called me on May 24th when I learned the news of this devastating tragedy. I had been out of cellular range, working in the studio all day when I emerged, and messages about a mass shooting in the town I was born in began flooding my inbox. In a bit of shock, I drove home, hugged my children a bit tighter and longer than the night before, and then the reality of what had happened that day in the town I was born in set in. So the next morning, Camilla, myself, the kids, we loaded up the truck and we drove to Uvalde. When we arrived a few hours later, I got to tell you, even from the inside of our vehicle, you could feel the shock in the town. You could feel the pain, the denial, the disillusion, anger, blame, sadness, loss of lives, dreams halted. We saw ministries, we saw first responders, counselors, cooks, families trying to grieve without it being on the front page news. We met with the local funeral director and countless morticians who hadn't slept since the massacre the day before, because they've been working 24/7 trying to handle so many bodies at once, so many little innocent bodies who had their entire lives still yet to live. And that is there that we met two of the grieving parents, Ryan and Jessica Ramirez. Their 10-year-old daughter, Alethea. She was one of the 19 children that were killed the day before. Now, Alethea, her dream was to go to art school in Paris and one day share her art with the world. Ryan and Jessica were eager to share Alethea's art with us and said if we could share it, that somehow, maybe that would make Alethea smile in heaven. They told us that showing someone else Alethea's art would in some way keep her alive. Now, this particular drawing is a self-portrait, all right, of Alethea drawing with her friend in heaven looking down on her, drawing the very same picture. Her mother said of this drawing, she said, you know, we never really talked to her about heaven before, but somehow she knew. Alethea was 10 years old. Her father, Ryan, this man was steady. He was uncommonly together and calm. When a frazzled friend of his came up and said, how are you so calm? I'd be going crazy. Ryan told him, he said, no, you wouldn't. No, you wouldn't. You'd be strong for your wife and kids, because if they see you go crazy, that will not help them. Just a week prior, Ryan got a full-time line job, stringing power lines from pole to pole. And every day since landing that well-paying full-time job, he reminded his daughter Alethea, he said, girl, Daddy gonna spoil you now. Told her every single night. He said, Daddy's gonna take you to SeaWorld one day. But he didn't get to spoil his daughter. Alethea, she did not get to go to SeaWorld. We also met Anna and Danilo, the mom and the stepdad of 9-year-old Maite Rodriguez. Now, Maite wanted to be a marine biologist. She was already in contact with Corpus Christi University of A&M for her future college enrollment. 9 years old. Maite cared for the environment so strongly that when the city asked her mother if they could release some balloons into the sky in her memory, her mom said, oh no, Maite wouldn't want to litter. Maite wore green high-top Converse with a heart she had hand-drawn on the right toe because they represented her love of nature. Camilla's got these shoes. Can you show these shoes, please? Wore these every day. Green Converse with a heart on the right toe. These are the same green Converse on her feet that turned out to be the only clear evidence that could identify her after the shooting. How about that? Maite wrote a letter. Her mom said if Maite's letter could help someone accomplish her dream, that then her death would have an impact. And it would mean her dying had a point and wasn't pointless. That it would make the loss of her life matter. The letter reads, Marine biologist, I want to pass school to get to my dream college. My dream college is in Corpus Christi by the ocean. I need to live next to the ocean because I want to be a marine biologist. Marine biologists study animals and the water. Most of the time I will be in a lab. Sometimes I will be on TV. Then there was Ellie Garcia, a 10-year-old, and her parents, Stephen and Jennifer. Ellie loved to dance and she loved church. She even knew how to drive tractors and was already working with her dad and her uncle mowing yards. Ellie was always giving of her gifts, her time, even half-eaten food on her plate. They said around the house, we called her the Great Regifter. Smiling through tears, her family told us how Ellie loved to embrace, said she was the biggest hugger in the family. Now, Ellie was born Catholic, but had been going to Baptist church with her uncle for the last couple of years. Her mom and dad were proud of her because they said she was learning to love God no matter where. The week prior to her passing, she'd been preparing to read a verse from the Bible for the next Wednesday night's church service. The verse was from Deuteronomy 6:5. And thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy might. That's who Ellie was becoming. But she never got to read it. Service on that Wednesday night. Then there was a fairy tale love story of a teacher named Irma and her husband Joe. What a great family this was. This was an amazing family. Camilla and I, we sat with about 20 of their family members in their living room, along with their 4 kids. Kids were 23, 19, 15, and 13. They shared all these stories about how Irma and Joe served the community and would host all these parties, and how Irma and Joe were planning on getting a food truck together when they soon retired. They were humble, hard-working people. Irma was a teacher who her family said went above and beyond and just couldn't say no to any kind of teaching. Joe had been commuting to and from work 70 miles away in Del Rio for years. Together they were the glue of the family. Both worked overtime to support their 4 kids. Irma even worked every summer when school was out. The money she had made 2 summers ago paid to paint the front of the house. The money she made last summer paid to paint the sides of the house. This summer's work was going to pay to paint the back of the house. Because Irma was one of the teachers who was gunned down in the classroom. Joe, her husband, literally died of heartache the very next day when he had a heart attack. They never got to paint the back of their house. They never got to retire. And they never got to get that food truck together. We also met a cosmetologist. She was well-versed in mortuary makeup. That's the task of making the victims appear as peaceful and natural as possible for their open casket viewings. These bodies were very different. They needed much more than makeup to be presentable. They needed extensive restoration. Why? due to the exceptionally large exit wounds of an AR-15 rifle. Most of the body so mutilated that only DNA test or green Converse could identify him. Many children were left not only dead, but hollow. So yes, counselors are going to be needed in Uvalde for a long time. Counselors are needed in all these places where these mass shooters have been for a long time. I was told by many that it takes a good year before people even understand what to do next. And even then, when they become secure enough to take the first step forward, a lifetime is not going to heal those wounds. But again, you know what every one of these parents wanted, what they asked us for? What every parent separately expressed in their own way to Camilla and me? That they want their children's dreams to live on. That they want their children's dreams to continue to accomplish something after they are gone. They want to make their loss of life matter. Look, we heard from so many people, right? Families of the deceased, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, Texas Rangers, hunters, Border Patrol, and responsible gun owners who won't give up their Second Amendment right to bear arms. And you know what they all said? We want secure and safe schools, and we want gun laws that won't make it so easy for the bad guys to get these damn guns. So, we know it's on the table. We need to invest in mental health care. We need safer schools. We need to restrain sensationalized media coverage. We need to restore our family values. We need to restore our American values. And we need responsible gun ownership. Responsible gun ownership. We need background checks. We need to raise the minimum age to purchase an AR-15 rifle to 21. We need a waiting period for those rifles. We need red flag laws and consequences for those who abuse them. These are reasonable, practical, tactical regulations to our nation, states, communities, schools, and homes. Responsible gun owners are fed up with the Second Amendment being abused and hijacked by some deranged individuals. These regulations are not a step back. They're a step forward for a civil society and the Second Amendment. Look, is this cure-all? Hell no. But people are hurting. Families are, parents are. And look, as divided as our country is, this gun responsibility issue is one that we agree on more than we don't. It really is. Look, this should be a nonpartisan issue. This should not be a partisan issue. There is not a Democratic or Republican value in one single act of these shooters. It's not. But people in power have failed to act. So we're asking you. And I'm asking you, will you please ask yourselves, can both sides rise above? Can both sides see beyond the political problem at hand and admit that we have a life preservation problem on our hands? Because we got a chance right now to reach for and to grasp a higher ground above our political affiliations. A chance to make a choice that does more than protect your party. A chance to make a choice that protects our country now and for the next generation. We got to take a sober, humble, and honest look in the mirror and rebrand ourselves based on what we truly value. What we truly value. We got to get some real courage and honor our immortal obligations instead of our party affiliations. Enough with the counterpunching. Enough of the invalidation of the other side. Let's come to the common table that represents the American people. Find a middle ground, the place where most of us Americans live anyway, especially on this issue. Because I promise you, America, you and me, we are not as divided as we are being told we are. No. How about we get inspired? Give ourselves just cause to revere our future again. Maybe set an example for our children.
Actor Matthew McConaughey speaking there at the White House press briefing after visiting Uvalde, Texas, and speaking with the family members of some of the victims. Also should note that he was born and spent part of his life in Uvalde, Texas. All right, we'll be right back after this quick break.
We are now in a major point of flux from being a telco into being a techco. And I think we're not the only big company that is looking at it. We are moving it really into a time where we're looking into consumer digital products, enterprise digital products, and really looking at providing solutions, not just providing connectivity.
Russia's foreign ministry is banning another 61 American citizens from entering the country. They include defense and media executives, along with several top U.S. officials, among them Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. Moscow has already sanctioned U.S. President Joe Biden and more than 900 other Americans. Russia's foreign ministry is also demanding the U.S. government lift restrictions on Russian journalists in the United States. Fred Pleitgen joins us live now from Moscow. So, Fred, 61 more Americans banned from entering Russia in retaliation for sanctions. What more can you tell us?
Hi there, Zain. Well, a lot of this looks to be largely symbolic from the Russian Federation. It's unclear how many of those entities and those individuals who are now essentially sanctioned by the Russians were actually traveling to Russia on a daily basis or on a regular basis. But, you know, it is something that we've seen from Russia as a pattern in the past as well, where individuals were sanctioned by the United States or allies of the United States, and in a tit-for-tat action, the Russians would then sanction individuals as well. So it certainly seems as though that's something that sort of goes towards that exact same pattern. Unclear how much of a difference that is actually going to make in the broader scheme of things right now, where at the same time, of course, you still have Russia's war in Ukraine very much going on, what the Russians still call a special military operation, and the U.S., of course, remaining very tough in that regard. Obviously, the Russians with those counter sanctions right now trying to punch back, but at the same time, it's unclear how much of a difference that is actually really going to make, Zain.
And Fred, what is Vladimir Putin right now saying about how sanctions have impacted the Russian economy?
Well, look, I think that right now what he's saying is that, of course, those sanctions have had an impact. What he said today, for instance, is that he believes that there are also chances in these sanctions as well for Russia to develop its own economy. But nevertheless, of course, there has been big inflation in Russia, even though the Russians are saying that they have this under control. And, of course, I think one of the biggest things that the Russians are saying right now is a huge impact is, of course, the global food crisis that we've been talking about, where right now a lot of countries are saying it's very difficult to get grain and other sort of agricultural products. The U.S. and its allies are saying that only Russia is to blame for that because of what they call the blockade of Ukrainian ports, especially the port of Odessa, where right now the Russian foreign minister is actually in Turkey trying to find some sort of way out of that impasse. But the Ukrainians are saying, look, if they take, for instance, their minds away from that port, they're afraid that the Russians are going to attack that port, which is something, of course, the Russians have fired, for instance, cruise missiles at Ukrainian ports in the past. So it's an extremely difficult situation. I think one that is really showing the global impact of Russia's war in Ukraine, which again they keep saying is a special military operation, but it's clearly having a huge impact on food security around the world. And right now it seems as though it's very difficult to see how, in at least the medium-term future, the world and especially the U.S. and its allies are going to come to terms with that, Zain.
All right, Fred Pleitgen live for us there. Thank you so much. Ukrainian energy officials are butting heads with the UN's nuclear chief over the safety of Europe's largest nuclear power plant. Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia plant fell to Russian occupation back in March. Earlier this week, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, said Ukraine had invited his organization to conduct checks at the site. But Ukrainian officials are denying the invitation and accusing Mr. Grossi of legitimizing Russia's control of the plant. Earlier, the IAEA head told CNN's Becky Anderson that he sees the trip as an obligation, not a social visit.
The Ukrainian government has requested us to come to perform an obligation, all right? This is not about a social invitation, or maybe if you want to come or not. This is an obligation for the IAEA and for Ukraine to have these inspections, which are not taking place, I will repeat, for a long time now, with a lot of nuclear material there that needs to be inspected.
Still to come tonight, a new drug in cancer treatment exceeds expectations in an early trial. What this could mean in terms of beating the disease for good. We speak to our health reporter next.
Air quality update in association with Copernicus, Europe's Eyes on Earth. Air quality update in association with Copernicus, Europe's Eyes on Earth.
June 20th, a CNN concert event. Let's celebrate, educate, and lift every voice. Juneteenth, a global celebration for freedom. Live from the Hollywood Bowl, only on CNN.
Welcome to The Lead. We begin with breaking news. The United States has plunged into a recession. We're seeing infections at an all-time high. What's your reaction to that? Here are the facts.
The Lead with Jake Tapper.
A new cancer drug has shown promising results in a breakthrough new study. 12 rectal cancer patients whose tumors had not spread to other organs were given a drug called dostarlimab. After 6 months, all 12 patients showed no evidence of tumors. Let me say that again. No evidence of tumors in all 12 patients after receiving this drug. But experts say that more study is needed and it's too early to call this a cure. Let's bring in CNN health reporter Jacqueline Howard. Jacqueline, too early to call this a cure, but this is a miracle. This is literally a miracle. 12 patients, none of them showing any sign of tumors after receiving this particular drug. How promising is this?
It is exciting, but Zain, more research is needed because these are just 12 patients. But to tell you a little bit about this drug, it's an immunotherapy. So how it works, it doesn't kill cancer cells directly. Rather, it harnesses the body's immune system to target cancer. in the body. And in this study in particular, as you said, there were 12 participants, and the patients had a certain type of cancer gene mutation. So this was a specific population of patients. And these are patients where cancer did not spread to other parts of the body. And these patients were followed for 6 to 25 months. So during that time span is when, as you said, we saw no signs of cancer, but more research is needed to determine how long the body responds to this treatment. And the treatment is administered as an IV. Patients received every 3 weeks. They received treatment for 6 months. And some side effects were very minor.